Every time I go into an American bookstore, even the independent bookstores, the experience is equivalent to listening to Top 40 radio, right? The bookstores nowadays are basically showcases for the top 5 or the big 5 publishers. So that almost everything that I'm seeing is overly produced, easily marketable. Occasionally there will be a book that interests me, that intrigues me. Very often the writers or the literary writers that are there in front of me are writers who earned their readership before traditional publishing began this downslide, and it's definitely in a downslide. That model cannot continue to exist. So, for this episode of Book Rants, I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to read a couple of self-published memoirs. I have to admit I continue to have a bit of a prejudice against self-published books, perhaps unfairly. I wanted to put that to the test. Even so, I chose books in my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is travel and sports, so that if the books didn't meet my standards, I wouldn't be completely disappointed. The 2 books that I chose are Zen and the Art of Coaching Basketball, Memoir of a Namibian Odyssey. Namibia is an African country, written by Ben Guest, self-published in 2021. And the other book is Overseas Famous, The Travels and Tribulations of a Basketball Globetrotter, by the former professional basketball player in Europe, Kevin Owens. He was a big 6'10" dude from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Both of these books attracted me. Both of these guys are interesting dudes. I did a little bit of research on them both before I read the books, and they are people who live interesting lives. So that boded well. Here's the plan for this video. I'm going to talk about these 2 books, what they're about first, then I'm going to talk about their literary quality, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about, or a little bit more about, self-publishing versus the traditional model, and what both systems have to offer us. All right, so here we go. Okay, let's speak first about Ben Guest's book. Ben Guest grew up in Baltimore, then graduated from Amherst College, a very, very good school, in 1997. He spent 2 years after that as a Peace Corps volunteer in Namibia as an English teacher. After that, he returned to the United States, worked as an English teacher and assistant basketball coach in the Mississippi Delta. He seems to have, or he discovered, a passion for coaching. He began to follow the traditional methods with coaches like Bobby Knight from Indiana and then later Texas Tech, a very controversial coach. And his understudy, Coach Krzyzewski from Duke, Coach K. Coach K coached under Coach Knight at Army years ago. Their method is, let's say, confrontational. They intimidate, they curse, they humiliate, and form their teams that way. He took on or learned from them, used it as a coach himself, failed with it, decided to get his PhD in education from the University of Mississippi. While he did that, he learned a lot of new pedagogies, and he also learned to meditate. Then after he got his PhD, he became an educational consultant. And then 14 years after he left the Peace Corps, he's living a life of, let's say, professional dissatisfaction. He's kind of a seeker, Ben Guest, in general, and decides he's got to do something, stir up his life, so he goes back to Namibia on a 2-year contract with this private school there. It doesn't have sports teams, but he becomes a volunteer coach for the local public school with a bunch of athletically gifted but raw athletes and basketball players, and he converts them through meditation and through the pedagogical techniques that he learned getting his PhD, through being what he calls an anti-coach he turns them into champions, really. It's a book about contrasting coaching styles, different coaching philosophies. And he puts them out there for us to study, okay? I'll get into what I think Ben Guest did really, really well and how I think he might have improved the book in a second. But now let's go on to the other book. Okay, Kevin Owens' book. Kevin Owens played for Camden Catholic High School, and like I said, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. A very good program. According to him, he wasn't the best player there, but he had, how does he say, that most orgasmic word in college basketball, potential. He got a scholarship offer from USC, but ultimately chose Monmouth College in Long Island, where in 2001, as a sophomore, he made it to the NCAA tournament. They won the first game, and then they lost the second game badly to Duke University, which ended up winning the entire tournament. He finished his career at Monmouth College with over 1,000 points in 2003. He wasn't drafted by the NBA, but he played for 3 years and stood out in the D League. Now I guess it's called the G League, which is like basically NBA minor league. He had what he calls a cup of coffee in the NBA with the Philadelphia 76ers, his home team. And he had the misfortune of being guarded by a guy named Reggie Evans. That chapter is sort of like a cautionary tale, because Reggie Evans was apparently a beast of intensity, and Kevin Owens wasn't ready for that. And he says he should have been. Then he spent a bunch of years playing abroad. First, well, I guess he played for a while in Poland in that 3-year stretch with Rono Dazzle, part of the NBA D League. It didn't go well, but then after he finishes his stint there in the D League, he went to Australia, where he had perhaps his best basketball experience. Basketball players in Australia apparently are celebrities, stars, so we got a sense of his star power there. Then he had a terrible experience in South Korea. He was expecting a lot of money. He went over there. He was basically treated like chattel, like a workhorse, like livestock. Blew out his knee because they trained him wrong. Came back, had to pay for knee surgery. I don't think he ever really recovered from that. I mean, physically. Nonetheless, he returned to play for a year, another very, very good experience in New Zealand. Then he had another, I would say, well, a very interesting experience in Kosovo, where he felt, again, almost like a hostage, where he felt as though if he didn't win, he might not be allowed to return home. That stretch of chapters where he talks about his experience abroad, first in Australia, then in North Korea, then in New Zealand, then in Kosovo, and then he finishes up his career in Estonia. Those chapters, it's a great stretch of chapters. Then the book finishes. It's in 3 parts. It's domestic career, international career, and then he talks about what he calls, I guess, there are kind of little chapters about generalities about playing abroad. And that's where he gets into the kind of dark side, the really dark side of his career, his fears, I would say. You know, it's funny. It's like, at one point he says, it's a great line in the book where he says that he doesn't like to badmouth his experience because he knows he's so fortunate to have had it, but he says to badmouth the experience, he feels like, how does it say, the insanely hot girl calling herself fat in front of her overweight friends. And so you kind of get the sense that he's doesn't really want to reveal the pain and suffering he went through, mental and physical, as much as he would have liked. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now as I get into the literary quality of these 2 books. Okay, the literary quality. Ben Guest is a very good writer. He can write a very sophisticated sentence. At the beginning of the book, he is, when he's writing about his first experience as a Peace Corps volunteer, and he's in Africa, and he's living about 2 miles from Angola, which is in the midst of a civil war. And he writes, every now and again, a stray shot would drift over the border like a lost soldier. It's a great line. Okay? Also, he has a real gift for characterization. I read his book on my Kindle. So in about 5-page chapter on my Kindle, which would be about 3 pages in, I guess, a hard copy, he manages to do a character portrait of this high school coach from, I guess, Simmons High School in Mississippi, a guy named George Willis. And he just absolutely creates this very, very vivid portrait in a matter of just a few pages. Very few writers can do that. He does it very, very well. He also, in the book, when he is sort of studying and going to clinics that are led by Coach Knight or Coach K, he describes them very, very well. Very, very efficiently. Maybe even too efficiently. I would say reductively. Because as much as he practices this philosophy of the kind of anti-coach, of Zen coaching, he kind of puts them down for being, as I say, confrontational and humiliating. I bet there would be in them, in both Coach Knight and in Coach K, I bet you there's some Zen in them. You know, that's the thing about this book. You know, it's too short. It's just too short. And so he doesn't really take advantage of his material like he could have. Like, what if he really went into and studied the philosophies of Coach Knight and Coach K to try to find in them a bit of the anti-coach? What makes their teams work? Okay? What makes the championships that they achieved similar to the championships that he achieved? He's also very, very good, Ben Guest, at like setting up big moments. The book ends, I would say the last quarter of the book, it's really just describing games, and he does that very, very well, but there's a lot of white space. And he kind of uses repetition too much. He kind of depends too much on repetition, key lines and key phrases for effect. And I think perhaps what he could have done in the book is gone deeper into these characters, because he's got these great characters and he's so good at character development and character description that I almost feel like he just kind of wasted his talents there. Like, I wish I got to know these kids. There's bits of them. There's bits of this kid called Sipo, and there's another kid came. I don't know, there's 4 or 5 kids that you kind of get a bit of. You get their personalities, which is not easy. He even shows their personalities on the court a little bit. But I mean, it kind of ends without you really getting to know them, and he must have known them so well. He must have known them so well. So you can only write this book once, and I wish he'd given it more words, given it more of his talent, more of his literary talent, okay? Okay, Kevin Owens is also a gifted writer. His writing's not refined though, and perhaps in his book I noticed that perhaps a better copy editor was in order. I know that Ben Guest was edited by a master, Glenn Stout, and probably that had something to do with the literary quality too. I mean, writing is a collaborative effort. That's not taking anything away from Ben Guest, that, you know, Glenn Stout probably assisted him in giving the book a certain amount of refinement. Perhaps Kevin Owens' book suffered from, I don't know, I wouldn't say poor editing, but maybe not the best editing. But still, his writing is maybe a bit kind of too much like a blog, okay? But let me just say, although his writing lacks sophistication, it never lacks soul, okay? Perhaps there are too many pop references, okay? He goes too much for the kind of easy laugh. He's never trying to, I would say, impress the reader, but maybe he's trying to please the reader too much. Give the reader what he or she wants. I would say that, you know, with Kevin Owens, you know, it's fascinating because part of maybe what made him mentally tough was the ability to keep positive when bad shit was happening. And so you kind of get the sense that it's not only near the end of the book where he kind of gets into these demons that he was kind of like pursued by, right? His struggle with toughness, with rage, with pressure, okay, with depression. all of those things, when he starts to get into them near the end, I was really fascinated, really fascinated. You know, you get the sense that he's got this problem with rage. He talks a little bit how he gained toughness. That's a great scene in the book of how he gained toughness in his rivalry with this one player when he was playing in the D-League. I wish he'd been a bit more raw about that. Raw is not the word. A bit more honest, a bit more forthcoming. It's very raw, the book, in the best of ways, and maybe not in the best of ways, okay, with the prose. A sample of his sentence. He would say he's in Kosovo at one point, and he's lost, and he has to get back for practice or he's going to be fined. Okay, so he says, the cab driver was taking me to a more unfamiliar area than the unfamiliar area that I was already not familiar with, right? It's almost like he just lets himself go. And maybe that's not the most perfect sentence, but it popped for me. So let me talk now a little bit about my general impressions about self-publishing versus the traditional model. Okay, it seems to me that where self-publishing lags behind a bit is in the editing, the filters. I think that both books would have been improved by more editing. As I say, I know Ben Guest was edited by Glenn Stout, who was a master, but that's not enough. Okay? Also, you know, if you hire an editor, okay, as opposed to receiving editing from someone who is an employee of the house that's publishing you, okay, that editor's ass is on the line, okay? So heads can roll if that editor doesn't get it right, if that editor lets something slip through, okay? I think that Ben Guest's book, even Ben Guest's book, would have been improved by an editor just saying to him, you gotta expand this out. You gotta make it bigger, okay? You can't reduce it or you can't be reductive, okay? You have to take on the challenges of this basically proposition that you are putting forth to the reader that, you know, this anti-coach style is ultimately more effective than the traditional coaching style. You got to get deeper into that. You got to challenge yourself more on that, okay? You have to put it more fairly in front of the reader, okay? Like, for example, he'll have a line like, leadership is about lifting people up, not tearing people down. So on the one hand, yeah, you can kind of agree with that, but sometimes, you know, it's about lifting them up after tearing them down. You know, like sometimes he falls into these, I won't call them cliches, but they're almost like he's almost summing up life too neatly, or summing up wisdom too neatly, or summing up experience and life experience too neatly. And with Kevin Owens' book, right, like I think an editor would have not only copy edited this book better, but would have also said, look, cut back on the pop references, okay? I mean, look, a pop reference works, okay, when through that reference, you kind of illuminate what you're using as a reference as much as what you're kind of hoping to shed light on with the reference. You know, like if you refer to a song or use a song to describe a moment, I want that song to seem new as well as the moment to seem clearer, you know? And I would say he very, very rarely succeeds at that, okay? And I think an editor would have told him to cut back a bit on that, and it would have made the book much better. But, you know, these are the people in the vanguard, people like Kevin Owens and Ben Guest. These are the people who are changing the publishing model for good, so that the type of books, right, that I like to read are there, accessible. So, good for them, man. Good for them. Read their books.